He told his friends I was the problem, the overbearing mother, the one who couldn't let go. He said it at dinner parties, at the golf club, probably over drinks with his wife, while they spent the money I'd been sending every single month. What neither of them counted on was this: I built a career out of knowing exactly what people cost and when to stop paying. Let me tell you something about pot roast.
If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. You can't fake it. It takes time. It takes patience. It takes knowing when to leave it alone and trust the process. I had been making mine since before my son Elliot could reach the stovetop, and I had never once brought it to a table cold, late, or without the little dish of horseradish on the side that he'd loved since he was 9 years old. So when I pulled up to the curb in front of his house that Sunday, that beautiful craftsman bungalow on Elmwood Drive with the Japanese maple in the yard that I had admired when they first bought it, I had the pot in both hands, wrapped in a quilted carrier I'd owned for 15 years, still warm from the oven, and I felt good, settled, useful in the way that only mothers understand. The walk from the car to the front door is maybe 40 feet. It's a brick path with low boxwoods on either side. I know it well. I'd walked it probably 60 or 70 times since they bought that house 6 years ago. I used to love that walk. The smell of the boxwoods in warm weather, the sound of the neighborhood, sprinklers, a dog somewhere down the street, a lawnmower on Sundays. I was 10 feet from the front door when I heard Meredith's voice through the living room window. Now, I want to be clear about something. The window was cracked. It was a warm afternoon in early October, the kind of day where you open a window to get a little air moving through the house. And that's exactly what they had done. I was not pressing my ear to the glass. I was not sneaking. I was walking up a brick path with both hands full, arriving 5 minutes early the way I always do, because my father used to say that punctuality is the courtesy of decent people, and I made it a rule I lived by for 40 years of running my own company. I heard Meredith's voice first. Sharp and clear the way a voice gets when the person speaking has stopped caring who hears them. I cannot do another one of these Sundays, Elliot. I mean it this time. A pause. She walks in here like she's inspecting a hotel, touches the curtains, asks about the gutters. Did you notice she looked at the baseboards last time? The baseboards, Elliot. Like I'm being graded. Another pause. Shorter. I don't care. I'm telling you, if she comes in here today with that pot and that smile and that look she gives me, I'm going to lose my mind. I am done performing for that woman. I had stopped walking. I don't know exactly when. I was just standing there on the brick path, holding $40 worth of chuck roast and root vegetables in a quilted carrier, listening to my daughter-in-law describe me like I was a recurring problem she hadn't figured out how to solve yet. Then Elliot's voice. Quieter. The tone of a man who has had this conversation many times and knows that it only ends one way. Just get through it, Mur. It's a couple hours. It doesn't have to be a whole thing. Just get through it. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not she's my mother, or please be kind to her, or even could you try, just this once. Just get through it. I stood there on that brick path and took one full, slow breath. The kind I used to take before walking into a room with a difficult client. The kind that says, you are not going to cry, you are not going to turn around, and you are absolutely not going to let anyone in that house know that you heard a single word. Then I walked to the front door, and I rang the bell. I heard the sound of movement inside. A voice, Meredith's, saying something quick and low. Then footsteps. Then the door opened, and there was my son, 41 years old, a little heavier than he used to be, wearing a blue linen shirt he'd had since before the marriage. He had his father's eyes and his father's way of standing when he was uncomfortable. Weight shifted slightly back, shoulders just a little too square. "Mom, hey, come on in." He stepped aside and took the pot carrier from my hands, which was thoughtful of him, or possibly just reflexive. "Thank you, sweetheart." I stepped inside. "It smells like you've got the AC on. You keeping it cool in here?" "Yeah, Mur gets warm." He was already walking toward the kitchen. Meredith was in the living room, standing near the sideboard, adjusting a candle that did not need adjusting. She was wearing a cream-colored linen dress with her hair down. She looked beautiful, honestly. She always did. She had the kind of effortless polish that women like Meredith cultivate very carefully and then spend years pretending is natural. "Eleanor," she said, turning with a smile that landed about a half second after it should have. "We didn't hear the car." "I parked around the corner," I said, which was true. The street was full. "You look lovely, Meredith." "Oh, this old thing." She waved a hand. "I was just going to change, actually." She wasn't. But that's fine. We were both performing by that point, and I had been doing it considerably longer than she had. We moved to the dining room. Elliot opened a bottle of red wine that I recognized as one I'd brought 2 months ago. He poured 3 glasses and we sat down, and I unpacked the pot roast onto the trivet they'd had as a wedding gift and had never once used for anything else. The afternoon light came through the tall windows. The Japanese maple outside had just started to turn. It was, in every visual sense, a perfect Sunday. And I sat there at that table, cutting my pot roast into small, even pieces, listening to Meredith talk about a renovation she wanted to do in the master bath, and I kept my expression exactly where I needed it to be. Interested, warm, appropriate. Because here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just their mother and mother-in-law. I wasn't just the woman who brought pot roast and asked about the gutters. I was a founding partner of my son's design firm, and the paperwork that was supposed to remove me from that position had never, in 22 years, been properly filed. I had known about it for 18 months. I had been deciding what to do about it ever since. That Sunday afternoon, standing at that brick path with my hands full and my son's voice in my ears, saying, "Just get through it, I made my decision," I would be getting through it too, just not the same way they expected. The thing about Meredith is that she's not stupid. I want to make that clear, because a lot of stories like this one paint the villain as a fool, and that was never true here. Meredith was intelligent, well-read in the way that people who follow the right accounts online can seem well-read, and she had a gift for conversation that I genuinely admired, even when she was aiming it at me like a small, elegant weapon. She waited until Elliot had gone to the kitchen to check on the rolls. That was when she leaned forward slightly, set her wine glass down with a little more care than necessary, and said, "So, Eleanor, are you keeping busy?" "Always," I said. "That's good." She tilted her head. "Because I imagine the adjustment is hard. You built that business for so long, and now, well, it must feel strange. All that structure just gone." I was semi-retired. I had been clear about that distinction more than once. Semi-retired means I still consulted, still sat on 2 nonprofit boards, still mentored young women who were starting their own event planning businesses the way I had started mine, with nothing but a second-hand folding table and a phone that rang more than I had answers for. "It's a different kind of busy," I said, "but I stay useful." "Of course you do." She smiled, the smile of a woman who does not think you are useful at all. "You should think about traveling, though. Seriously, Ethan and I were just saying—" "Elliot," I said pleasantly. She blinked. "Sorry?" "His name is Elliot. He's never gone by Ethan." I took a sip of wine. "You were saying?" A small tightening around her eyes. "Right. Elliot and I were just saying you should do something for yourself. Go somewhere. You've earned it." Translation: "Please stop coming over." "That's very thoughtful," I said. Elliot came back with the rolls and the conversation moved on, the way dinner conversations do, skating past the thin ice without ever stopping to test it. We talked about a project the firm had just landed, a mixed-use development in the warehouse district, significant contract, the kind of work Elliot had been working toward for years. Meredith talked about it with the comfortable ease of someone who considers a husband's career accomplishments to be jointly owned. At one point, she said, "We're thinking about redoing the guest suite, make it a proper space for when people visit from out of town." She didn't look at me when she said it. I noticed that. "Sounds lovely," I said. After dessert, a store-bought tart from a bakery on the good end of town, which is fine, I'm not judging, Meredith suggested they might start keeping Sundays more open. "It's just," she said, pausing as if searching for the right word, which she had already found, "we're at a phase where the weekends are really our only time to decompress. Elliot's been under so much pressure, and I need that time with him too." Elliot looked at his wine glass. "I completely understand," I said. "Family needs breathing room." She nodded, gratified. "Exactly. Maybe we do a proper sit-down dinner once a month? Somewhere nice? You pick the restaurant." Once a month, at a restaurant of my choosing, which was her way of saying, "We'll see you on a schedule, in a public place, where you can't look at the baseboards." "That's a fine idea," I said. I helped clear the table. I said goodbye the way I always do. A kiss on Elliot's cheek, a hug for Meredith that she accepted with the practiced warmth of someone who has learned to perform affection without feeling it. I carried my empty pot out to the car and drove home. I got inside. I sat in my reading chair. I did not turn on the TV. I thought about my son's face at that table, the way he had looked at his wine glass instead of at me when his wife suggested that once a month was probably enough, the way he had said through the cracked window, "Just get through it." Like I was a procedure, like I was something to be endured, and I thought about the folder in my office safe, and I thought, all right then, let's get started. I should tell you about the safe. It's a fireproof box, actually, the kind you bolt to the floor of a closet. I've had it for 30 years. Inside it lives the kind of paperwork that most people stuff in a shoebox and then can't find when they need it. Property deeds, insurance policies, the original articles of incorporation for my event planning company, my will, my mother's death certificate, my father's watch, and a folder labeled simply Elliot, Firm. I had opened that folder 18 months before that Sunday dinner. The occasion was Elliot refinancing the Elmwood Drive house. He'd called to say he needed a few old documents from when I was involved with the firm. Something about the lender wanting a clean title history on all related properties. I'd gone into the safe to pull what he needed, and while I was in there, I had looked at everything. And I mean everything. The original incorporation agreement for Halstead Design Group filed in the spring of 2002. Elliot had been 27. He had a vision and almost no money. I had money and 30 years of knowing how to read a contract. We agreed. I would come in as a silent partner, 12% equity, no day-to-day involvement. When he got on his feet, his words, I would exit. 7 years later, he came to me with a buyout offer. I thought it was fair. I signed what he put in front of me. I had never had reason to look closely at what happened after. But when I opened that folder 18 months ago, something caught my eye. A letter from his attorney at the time, addressed to the State Business Registration Office, referencing the ownership transfer, and clipped behind it, the response. A form letter noting that the required documentation for the transfer was incomplete and that additional filing would be necessary to complete the record. There was nothing after that, no follow-up filing, no confirmation of completion. I had read that letter 3 times, sitting on the floor of my closet in my reading glasses with the safe open in front of me. Then I had called my attorney, Denise. Denise had been practicing business law for 35 years. She had the demeanor of a person who has seen every variety of human foolishness and stopped being surprised by it sometime around 1994. When I described what I'd found, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Send me copies of everything in that folder." 3 weeks later, she called me back. "Eleanor," she said, "your 12% was never legally transferred. As far as the state of record is concerned, you are still a minority owner of Halstead Design Group." I had sat down very slowly. "How is that possible?" I said. Clerical failure on the attorney's part. It happens more than you'd think. The offer was made, you signed the internal agreement, the money changed hands, but the official state registration was never updated. The buyout exists as a private agreement, but the public record hasn't caught up. What does that mean for me? It means, Denise said carefully, that you have options. I'm not saying they're simple. I'm not saying they're without risk, but you have them. I had said thank you and hung up the phone and gone to make a cup of tea and thought about it for the better part of a year. Here is the truth. I had not planned to use it. I had thought of it as a piece of information, a card I was holding without intending to play. Elliot was my son. The firm was his life's work. I had no interest in upending that. But sitting in my reading chair that Sunday night, after the store-bought tart and the once-a-month restaurant suggestion and the wine glass Elliot had stared at instead of defending me, I understood that what I had thought of as patience had started to look a lot like erasure. I picked up the phone and texted Denise, "Can we meet this week? I'd like to discuss the Halstead matter." Her reply came 12 minutes later. "Tuesday at 10. Bring the folder." I went to bed that night and slept better than I had in months. Before I tell you about Tuesday, I need to tell you about the expense card. When Elliot and Meredith got married, I had done what mothers do. I had helped. They were young and starting out, and the wedding alone had cost more than my first car, my first apartment, and my first year of business combined, and I had contributed a significant portion of it because I wanted them to have a beautiful day. I do not regret that. What came after was more complicated. A few months into the marriage, Elliot mentioned that Meredith was handling a lot of the household logistics, vendors, contractors for some minor work on the house, that sort of thing. And wouldn't it be easier if she had a card on my account for those purposes? Business-related purchases, he'd said. Practical things. I had added her as an authorized user on one of my credit cards. I set no limit. I was not, in retrospect, thinking clearly about what no limit would look like over time. For the first year or so, the charges were reasonable. A plumber, supplies for the house, groceries a few times. I had checked the statements monthly and not thought much about it. And then I stopped checking as carefully. I will own that. I was busy. I trusted my son, and I told myself that if anything was wrong, I would know. The Sunday after that dinner, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and a full pot of coffee and went through 27 months of credit card statements with a yellow highlighter and a legal pad. I want to tell you the total because I think you need to hear it as a number, not a vague impression. $43,211 in 27 months, charged to my card, paid automatically from my checking account in Meredith's name. Not all of it was personal. I'll be fair. There were some household expenses mixed in. A refrigerator, a set of patio furniture, some landscaping work in the spring of the second year. I pulled those out. I was generous in what I considered legitimate. What remained, after I removed everything that could reasonably be called household or practical, was $31,400 and some odd dollars. Boutiques, spas, a weekend at a resort in Charleston. She and a friend, not Elliot, based on the dates, which fell during a week I knew Elliot had been at a conference in Denver. Dinners at restaurants I recognized as the kind where you go to be seen. A bracelet. 2 pairs of boots, a handbag from a store that doesn't put prices on its website. I wrote it all down. I put the legal pad in the folder with the incorporation documents. Then I made a second cup of coffee and went to the living room and read for an hour, because there is no point in making decisions when your blood is running hot. By evening, I was ready. I called the credit card company and removed Meredith as an authorized user, effective immediately. I did not call her first. I did not call Elliot. I processed the change and noted the confirmation number and put it in the folder. Then I sat back in my reading chair and folded my hands and waited. It took 48 hours. The call came on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a mentoring session via video. One of the young women I worked with, building her first catering operation out of a commercial kitchen she shared with 2 other entrepreneurs. And my phone buzzed with Meredith's name, and I let it go to voicemail. She called again 4 minutes later. I finished my session, made a few notes, and called her back. Eleanor. Her voice had that particular quality that I associated with Meredith, at her most controlled, tight, precise. The way a person sounds when they are choosing every word carefully, because they are furious and they know that fury alone is not going to get them what they want. Meredith? Hello? I was just finishing up a call. My card was declined this morning. Oh? At Hartley's, a beat, in front of 3 of my friends. Hartley's was a boutique on the east side of town, the kind with a small lobby and leather chairs and saleswomen who brought you champagne while you tried things on. I had been there once, years ago, for a client event. The prices were what you would expect from a store with leather chairs and complimentary champagne. I'm sorry to hear that was embarrassing, I said. Eleanor, what happened to the card? I made some adjustments to my accounts, I said pleasantly. I've been reviewing my finances and I decided to simplify things. A silence. Then, you removed me. I restructured the account, yes, without any warning. It's my account, Meredith. I kept my voice even, not cold, not warm, factual. I don't need to give notice for changes to my own accounts. Another silence, longer this time. I could hear her breathing. I waited. Elliot is going to call you, she said. I hope so, I said. I always love hearing from him. She hung up. I set the phone down and went back to my notes. Elliot called that evening. He was calmer than Meredith. This is what I mean when I say Elliot is not a bad person. He is a weak person, which is its own kind of problem, but he is not cruel by nature. He doesn't enjoy conflict. He avoids it the way water avoids uphill. Mom. His tone was the voice of someone who has been briefed. Can we talk about the card situation? Of course, I said. I was wondering when you'd call. Meredith's upset. I imagine so. She's been using that card for... It's been part of our household setup for a long time. 2 years and 3 months, I said. Yes. A pause. He hadn't expected me to have counted. I can explain some of those charges, he said. There are things on there that were practical expenses. The fridge, some contractor work. I've already accounted for those, I said. I reviewed everything carefully. Another pause. Okay. He shifted gears slightly. Look, I think we've all been under some stress. Maybe we could sit down somewhere, the 3 of us, and just talk it through. There might be a way to do this that works for everyone. I'm open to a conversation, I said. When you're ready. Good. He sounded relieved. And Mom, I was also going to mention, there's a guy I know, Randall. He's been involved in some of my business things. He's got connections with the property side of the firm, and he mentioned he'd be happy to just have coffee with you. Sort of a back channel, a neutral party. A neutral party, I repeated. Yeah, someone to talk to who doesn't have all the history. He's a good guy. He's connected to some of the real estate group that invested in the Warehouse District project. I said I'd be happy to meet Randall. I wrote his name on my legal pad. I spent the next 2 weeks thinking about Randall. I looked him up online and found his firm and his profile and the projects he was associated with. I thought about whether he might be someone who had a window into the firm's financial structure. I thought about whether Elliot had sent him to me as a kind of olive branch, someone who might make me feel heard without giving me any real information. I agreed to coffee at a place downtown, a Tuesday morning. He was friendly, younger than I expected, well-dressed. He talked about the Warehouse District project. He talked about how much Elliot had grown as a designer and a businessman. He told me Elliot was really coming into his own. Twice I tried to steer the conversation toward the firm's current ownership and structure. Both times, Randall deflected with the easy grace of someone who has been told which doors to keep closed. By the time I walked out to my car, I understood exactly what Randall was. He was a distraction, a personable, harmless distraction. Elliot had sent him not as a back channel, but as a social buffer. Someone to give me the feeling of being taken seriously without any of the substance of it. I had spent 2 weeks and 4 hours of my time on this. I went home, crossed Randall's name off my legal pad, and called Denise. "I need to move faster," I said. "I had a feeling," she said. "Come in Thursday." 2 days before my Thursday meeting with Denise, I received a text from Meredith. I want to read it to you, not because I have it memorized, but because I took a screenshot and put it in the folder, and I have looked at it several times since, mostly just to remind myself that I did not overreact. It was long. The gist of it was this. She had spoken with someone familiar with elder financial law. That was the phrase she used, and wanted me to know that removing an authorized user from a card without prior notice, after that user had come to rely on the card as part of household arrangements, could potentially be viewed as a form of financial harassment of a dependent family member. She used the phrase elder financial law twice. I put the phone down on my kitchen counter. I am 68 years old. I have run a company. I have managed payroll, contracts, vendor disputes, a lawsuit from a florist who claimed I had stolen his centerpiece design, which I had not, and the quiet devastation of my husband's death 11 years ago without once losing the thread of my own financial life. I have never, in 6.5 decades, been financially dependent on anyone. The suggestion that removing a grown woman's access to my credit card constituted harassment of me was so far outside the boundaries of anything I had expected that for a moment I simply stood in my kitchen and looked out the window. Then I called Denise. "She texted me," I said when Denise picked up. "What did she say?" I read her the relevant portions. There was a pause on Denise's end. Then she said, not unkindly, "Eleanor, that is not a legal claim. That is a woman who Googled some words and put them in a sentence." "I know," I said. "I just wanted to hear you say it." "It is not a legal claim," Denise said again. "Thank you." "Come in Thursday," she said. "We have real things to talk about." Denise's office is on the 14th floor of a building downtown that has very good coffee in the lobby and absolutely no parking nearby. I always budget an extra 20 minutes and walk 4 blocks. Worth it. I sat across from her Thursday morning with the folder open between us and my reading glasses on and a legal pad and 2 pens, because one always runs dry at the wrong moment. "All right," Denise said, laying a set of documents flat on the desk in front of me. "Here's where we are." She had pulled the original incorporation filing for Halstead Design Group from the state's business registration database. She had also pulled the 2009 buyout paperwork, both the internal agreement that I had signed and the subsequent communication with the state office. The gap was exactly what she had described 18 months earlier, but she had now put numbers around it. At the time of my original investment, 12% of Halstead Design Group had a nominal value of roughly $40,000. That was what I had received in the buyout, which, at the time, had seemed fair. The firm had grown considerably since then. Denise slid a 1-page summary across the desk. Current valuation estimate for Halstead Design Group based on recent contracts, revenue filings, and the warehouse district project, somewhere between $3.4 and $3.9 million. 12% of $3.6 million, she used the midpoint, was $432,000. I looked at the number for a long moment. "Now," Denise said, "I am not telling you that you are going to walk away with that number. There will be arguments about the validity of the original buyout, about your acceptance of the payment, about what a court would consider equitable given the circumstances. This is not a simple case." "I understand that," I said. "But you have standing," she said. "The public record has not been corrected. You are still, technically, a minority owner of that firm, and the attempt to transfer your interest was legally incomplete." What do I need to do? I said. First, she said, I want to prepare a formal notice of continuing interest. We file it with the state. We send a copy to Elliot's attorney, and we put everyone on notice that this is not going away. She folded her hands. Second, and I want you to hear this, I would like to request a full accounting of the firm's revenues for the past 7 years, as is your right as a minority owner of record. All right, I said. And third, she said, looking at me over her reading glasses, I want you to be prepared for this to get uncomfortable before it gets resolved. Denise, I said, I raised a teenager and ran a company through the 2008 financial crisis. I am entirely prepared for uncomfortable. She almost smiled. Denise doesn't quite smile. It's more of a softening around the corners of her eyes that functions as a smile. Good, she said. Then let's get started. Denise submitted the formal request for the original incorporation records from the state's business registration office on a Friday. Standard procedure. She expected the certified copies in 7 to 10 business days. 9 days later, she called me. We have a situation, she said. The state office had received an inquiry from an attorney she did not recognize, working on behalf of a party she could not immediately identify, requesting that certain incorporation records for Halstead Design Group be placed under what was called a clerical correction review. This was an administrative mechanism, rarely used, that allowed parties to flag records for potential amendment. While under review, access to those records through the standard request process could be delayed or restricted. Someone found out we were pulling those documents, Denise said. Elliot's attorney, I said. Almost certainly. Can they do this? Can they just flag the records and freeze our access? They can slow things down, Denise said. They cannot ultimately prevent a legitimate party from accessing public records. But this could add weeks to the timeline, and it muddies things. It signals they're willing to fight dirty to complicate access. I sat down at my kitchen table. What are our alternatives? I said. 2, she said. The registered agent who handled the original filing keeps their own copies. We contact them directly. It's a different channel, not subject to the same review process. And second, she paused. You said you had the original documents in your safe. I have them, I said. The full folder. If you can get me a notarized copy of the original incorporation agreement from your personal files, that becomes independent evidence. We wouldn't need the state's copy as the primary document. We just need it as confirmation. I'll have it to you by Monday, I said. Good, she paused. Eleanor. Whoever flagged this, they did it fast. They're watching more carefully than we expected. Then we'll need to be faster, I said. I got off the phone. I went to the closet. I opened the safe. I pulled out the folder, found the original incorporation agreement, all 12 pages of it, slightly yellowed at the edges, signed in blue ink in the spring of 2002, and drove it to a notary that same afternoon. The notary was in a shipping store. She had a handheld stamp and reading glasses on a beaded chain. It took 6 minutes and cost $11. I drove directly to Denise's office and left the envelope with her assistant. And then I went home and started working the phone in a direction I hadn't expected. I want to tell you about Vera Hutchins. I had met Vera exactly once, at Halstead Design Group's 10th anniversary party, which Elliot had held at a rooftop venue downtown on a warm evening in June. I remembered her because she was one of the few people at that party who was not performing. Everyone else was in their best clothes and their best voices, talking about projects and contacts and the kind of bright futures that design firm parties always seem to promise. Vera was standing near the bar in a sensible blazer, drinking sparkling water, watching the room with the calm attention of someone whose job required them to notice things. I had introduced myself and asked what she did for the firm. Books, she said simply. I've kept the books for 11 years. We talked for maybe 15 minutes, which is a long conversation by party standards. She was interested in my event planning background. I was interested in her opinion on the firm's trajectory. She was careful with what she said. She was always careful, I understood later. But there was a frankness to her that I appreciated. I had not spoken to her since, but I had remembered her name. When I got home from the notary, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at my legal pad and thought about who inside the firm would know about the incorporation documents. The bookkeeper would know. A bookkeeper with 11, now 22, years of institutional memory would know a great deal. I found her on a professional networking site, still employed at Halstead Design Group, still listed as senior bookkeeper. I sent her a brief message. "Vera, this is Eleanor Hartwell. I don't know if you remember me. We met at the firm's 10th anniversary party. I'm hoping to speak with you privately when you have time. Nothing inappropriate, I promise. Just some history I'm trying to piece together." I was not sure she would respond. She called me the next morning at 8:15. I was still in my robe. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said. "Yes, I remember you." A pause. "I've been wondering if someone would call." We spoke for 40 minutes. I will tell you the relevant parts. Vera told me that approximately 2 weeks before my first call with Denise, in other words, around the time Elliot had reached out about the refinancing documents, she had overheard a conversation between Elliot and his attorney in the conference room. The door had been open. She had been walking past with a stack of vendor invoices. She had heard Elliot's attorney say quite clearly, "The old filing is a loose end. We need to deal with it before anyone goes looking." She had not known at the time what filing he meant, but she had written the date and the words down in a notebook she kept in her desk drawer. Old habit, she said. 30 years of bookkeeping had taught her to write things down. When the request came to flag the state records for review, she had put 2 and 2 together. "I kept my own copy of the original incorporation agreement," she told me. "I keep everything. I always have. Some people think it's excessive." A small pause that might have been dry humor. "I don't." "Can I ask you something directly, Vera?" I said. "You can ask me anything," she said. "Why are you calling me?" A silence. Then, "Because what they're doing isn't right, and because I've watched the culture of that firm change over the last few years in ways that concern me." She stopped. "And because I liked you when we met. You seemed like someone who does things honestly." She mailed me a notarized copy of the original incorporation agreement that same day. It arrived 2 days later in a padded envelope with her return address and a short note, "In case it's useful." I held that envelope in both hands for a moment before I opened it. Then I called Denise. "We have a third copy," I said, "from an inside source." "Tell me about her," Denise said. I did. Denise was quiet for a moment. "Her motive is clean," she said. "Her motive is that she's a woman who has kept books honestly for 30 years and doesn't like watching people cheat." I said. "Yes. Her motive is clean." "Good," Denise said. "Then we're ready to send the letter." Denise's formal letter went to Elliot's attorney on a Thursday morning. Certified mail, email confirmation, the whole architecture of official intent. I did not read the full legal text because Denise writes in a dialect I admire but can't always follow. What I understood from her summary was this. The letter asserted my continuing ownership interest of 12% in Halstead Design Group, as documented in the original state filing, which had never been corrected or updated. It requested a full accounting of firm revenues from 2009 forward. It noted that any further interference with public records related to the firm would be added to the formal filing, and it stated clearly that my client, meaning me, was prepared to pursue all available remedies if the matter was not addressed within 30 days. Denise sent me a copy. I read my own name in the formal header, Eleanor Ann Hartwell, party of record, and felt something settle in my chest. Elliot called me 2 hours later. Not a text, a call. "Mom," he said, "I just got a call from my attorney." "I imagine you did," I said. I need to talk to you." "Not over the phone." "Of course," I said. "Come whenever you're ready." He came that Saturday morning, without Meredith. I had coffee ready and a plate of the shortbread I used to make when he was in college and had a hard week. I don't know why I made it. Muscle memory, probably. Some part of me that is always going to be his mother first. He sat at my kitchen table. He looked tired. Older than he had at Sunday dinner, which was only a few weeks earlier. He wrapped both hands around his mug and looked at it. "I didn't know," he said, "about the filing. I swear to you, Mom, I thought it was done. I paid you, you signed. I thought it was resolved." "I believe you," I said, which I did. Elliot is many things, but a sophisticated legal strategist is not one of them. The failure to complete the filing was his attorney's error. The attempt to bury it was his attorney's advice, taken without Elliot fully understanding what it meant. "Meredith doesn't know about the original partnership," he said. "She doesn't know any of this." "I know," I said. He looked up. "You knew about this for 18 months, he said. "You didn't say anything." "I was deciding," I said. "What made you decide?" I looked at my son. I thought about the brick path and the cracked window and just get through it. I thought about the once-a-month restaurant suggestion. I thought about $31,000 in boutique charges and a weekend in Charleston while he was at a conference. "A lot of things," I said, but mostly just, it was time. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "What do you want, Mom?" I picked up my coffee. "I'll tell you exactly what I want," I said. I had written them out. I do not trust myself to stay organized in emotional conversations. I have watched too many people walk into a negotiation with everything they need and walk out with nothing because they got flustered and lost the thread. So I had a piece of paper. 3 items, numbered. I smoothed it on the table and pushed it across to Elliot. He read it. I watched his face. The first item, formal documentation restoring my 12% ownership stake, filed properly with the state, with a concurrent private agreement clarifying that I would not exercise operational control or interfere with day-to-day management. I was not trying to run his firm. I was not trying to humiliate him. I simply wanted the record to be accurate and my position to be acknowledged. The second item, repayment of the personal charges on the supplemental card, the $31,400 that was not household expenses, on a structured schedule of his choosing over a period not to exceed 3 years. No interest. I was not a bank. I just wanted the money back. The third item, that we have coffee or lunch, just the two of us, once or twice a month. Not a formal family dinner, not a Sunday production, just my son and me, sitting somewhere, talking the way we used to before all of this calcified into obligation. Elliot read the paper twice. He set it down. "The third one," he said. "That's the one that—" He stopped. "I know," I said. "I haven't been good at this," he said. "The last few years, I've let things get—" He stopped again. "She was unhappy, and I was trying to manage it, and I think I just kept finding the path of least resistance." "The path of least resistance," I said, "ran through me." He didn't argue with that. Good. "I'll talk to Meredith about the repayment," he said. "You can handle that however you need to," I said. "It's between the two of you how you manage your finances. I just want the result." He nodded. He picked up a piece of shortbread. He ate it without saying anything. Then he said, "These are really good, Mom." "I know," I said. I will be honest. I had not expected Meredith to call me directly. I had assumed she would communicate through Elliot, or through Elliot's attorney, or through some combination of both, the way people conduct business they find unpleasant. She called me on a Wednesday evening. I was in the middle of reading and I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. Eleanor. Her voice had none of the charm she usually deployed. It was flat and tightly controlled. "Elliot told me what you're asking for." "All right," I said. "He also told me about the partnership." A pause. "That you've known about it for over a year." 18 months, I said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh, not a real one. "So you just held on to that and waited." Yes, I said, and now you're using it. Another pause. Elliot thinks you're being fair. He thinks your terms are reasonable. He's going to agree to everything. I know, I said. I want you to know, she said, and here the voice shifted slightly. I want to be accurate about this. It didn't crack. It didn't tremble, but it became less controlled. That what you're doing feels like emotional blackmail to me. It feels like you built this whole thing up and then waited until you had enough leverage to get what you wanted. I considered my response for a moment. Meredith, I said, do you know what leverage I had a month ago? She was quiet. I had a pot roast, I said, and a brick path to your front door. That's all I had. And you were planning to reduce me to once a month at a restaurant because I looked at the baseboards. A long silence. I heard you, I said, that afternoon, through the window. Another silence, longer. You never said anything, she finally said. No, I said. I didn't. I set my book down on the side table. Meredith, I am not trying to destroy your marriage or ruin Elliot's firm. I want what the terms say I want. No more, no less. What you do with your life and your money and your marriage going forward is entirely your concern. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said stiffly, "Fine." And she hung up. I picked my book back up. I read 2 more chapters before I went to bed. I slept fine. The formal agreement took about 3 weeks to draft, negotiate in minor points, and finalize. Denise handled the back and forth with Elliot's attorney, who to his credit stopped trying to be clever once it was clear that Denise had 3 independent copies of the original incorporation agreement and a bookkeeper willing to write a witness statement. The day I signed, I was sitting at my kitchen table. It was a Tuesday. I had on my reading glasses and my good pen, the one I'd bought myself after landing the biggest contract of my career. A ballpoint with a gold cap that is completely unnecessary and makes me happy every time I use it. Denise had sent everything over electronically and walked me through each page by phone. 12% ownership formally acknowledged. Revenue accounting provided for years 2009 through present. Repayment agreement for the supplemental card charges, structured over 30 months starting the first of the following month. Monthly coffee with Elliot, which does not require legal documentation, but which we had agreed to all the same, and which felt, in its own way, like the most important thing on the page. I signed everywhere Denise indicated. I saved the documents. I emailed them back. Then I wrote a card to Vera Hutchins. I had asked her during one of our phone conversations what she liked to do outside of work. She had mentioned, almost offhandedly, that she spent too much money at a bookshop near her apartment, a used bookshop that did events on weekend evenings. I sent her a gift card to that store and a handwritten card that said simply, "Thank you for doing the right thing. It made a difference. Eleanor." I did not make a production of it. There was no ceremony. I poured myself a glass of wine at 4 in the afternoon. I am 68 and I earned it. And I sat in my reading chair and looked out the window at the garden. It was a good day. It's December now, which means the mornings are cold and the light comes in low and golden through the east windows. And I have started making a pot of proper coffee every morning instead of the half pot I'd been doing since Elliot's visits had gotten sparse enough that I stopped making enough for 2. I have coffee with Elliot every other week. We go to a place on the north side with good scones and a window table he tries to grab when he can. We talk about his work. I tell him things about the firm I built, stories I don't think I ever told him before, the early years when things were genuinely hard and the only thing keeping me going was stubbornness and a calendar full of commitments I couldn't cancel. He listens. He asks questions. He is becoming, slowly and imperfectly, himself again. Meredith got a job, a real one, at an event planning startup that a young woman Elliot knows started up about 18 months ago. She is apparently good at client relations, which does not surprise me because she has always known how to be charming, and she recently handled her first large corporate event without any help. Elliot told me she came home that night looking like a different person. I did not arrange this. I want to be clear about that. I did not make any calls or drop any names. She found it on her own. Whether Elliot quietly encouraged it, I don't know. I didn't ask. The repayment comes in on the 1st of each month, automatically transferred, exactly as agreed. I won't pretend I spend a long time looking at it when it arrives. I note it, I file the record, I move on. What I have done with the money is redirect it into a small fund I set up through my church's community foundation, a mentorship and business education grant for women over 50 who are starting or rebuilding their professional lives. The first cycle of grants went out last month. There were 7 recipients. One of them sent me a card. Vera got a raise at the firm. She mentioned it in passing when we talked last month. We have a phone call every few weeks now. She said Elliot came to her office and told her he valued her institutional knowledge and wanted to make sure she knew it. She said it in the way she says most things, matter of fact and without drama, and I appreciated that about her. Denise sent me her final invoice and a very short note that said, "Well handled, Eleanor." Most people don't have the patience to wait for the right moment. I framed it. Not really, but I've kept it on my desk. The house on Elmwood Drive is still theirs. The Japanese maple will be bare now, this time of year. I drive past it sometimes, not to look at it in any pointed way, just because the route takes me that direction. I built nothing in that house and invested nothing in that neighborhood. That was always theirs. What I built was somewhere else, in the firm that carries my name on no signage but in 12% of its public record, and in the company I ran for 4 decades, and in the women I have mentored, and in the fund that now carries forward some small portion of what I earned over a working life I am proud of. I heard a saying once that I have been thinking about lately. The idea that if you raise something on nothing but easy food and 0 effort, you shouldn't be surprised when it takes and doesn't know when to stop. I think that's right. And I think the answer is not bitterness. The answer is simply stop feeding what doesn't feed you back. I have stopped. And life, in the way that life does when you stop bracing for impact, has gotten quieter and better and considerably more mine. Elliot called last Tuesday to confirm our coffee. He asked if I wanted to try somewhere new, a place he'd read about near the university. "Surprise me," I said. He did. The scones were excellent. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.